right, today I'm covering the rookie advantage that you have as a new SDR that you won't have at any other point in your entire career. I'm going to be breaking down exactly what these advantages are so that you can make sure you're taking advantage of them and putting them to use in your own day-to-day. And stick around to the end because I'm going to be sharing some personal experiences of my time as an SDR putting these to use that I haven't shared before. So let's get into it. All right, first, most SDRs only consider the disadvantages they have when they're new as an SDR. And that's fair. There are disadvantages. You're new to sales most of the time. You've never made cold calls. You're new to the industry. You're new to the company. You're new to the processes that you have to follow. All of these are legitimate disadvantages, but you're not considering the massive advantages that you have. An analogy I like to use is compare it to a video game. If you played a lot of video games growing up or still do, there's always advantages that you have at the beginning of the video game that you don't have at the end of the video game, and you don't realize it until you look back. It's easier to level up. It's easier to unlock certain perks or new maps or whatever the game is. And only at the end, when that stuff becomes incredibly hard, do you kind of look back and yearn for when it was easy again. And it's no different as a new SDR. So the first distinct advantage you have as a new SDR that you won't have as an account executive or any other time in your sales career is that you have one sole focus and objective primarily. In most SDR roles, your sole focus is to prospect and generate pipeline. Whether you do that through emailing, cold calling, social media, you have one imperative, and that is generate pipeline. This is no longer the case as an account executive when you have a million other things you have to worry about. Yes, you still have to focus on generating pipeline, but you have to manage your teams internally, manage through the entire sales cycle, manage solutions engineers, manage potential partners that you're working with, presentations, demos, all of that. As an SDR, you have one objective, and that is to set meetings and generate pipeline, and you can focus 100% of your efforts on that. That is a luxury you will not have for the rest of your sales career. All right, number two, and this feeds off having a sole objective to focus on, is that in the SDR role, you have instant gratification when it comes to your KPIs most of the time. Usually your KPIs are something related to how many meetings you set and how many of those meetings convert to opportunities and the amount of pipeline you get from those. So you can literally progress towards your quota as an SDR in minutes. It can be 10 a.m. and if you book a meeting on a cold call that you make it 10:07, 7 minutes later, you know that you have just made yourself more money, whether you get paid out in a quarterly bonus model or through commission. Your meetings directly translate to more money. As an account executive, this is not the case, and this is probably the toughest part about transitioning from an SDR to account executive that I don't see anyone talk about, is that you have to learn to be okay with delayed gratification. As account executive, you no longer get a pat on the back for setting a meeting or piping an opportunity that you find in your territory. That's just expected of you. As an account executive, your sales cycles can last months. I work in tech sales. It is very common for a typical sales cycle, to last 3 to 6 months, and it can last a lot longer than that. So you could be doing all the right things. You could be booking the meetings with the right people, making progress, but none of that is going to translate to dollars unless you actually close the deal. So you have to deal with that delayed gratification and that level of uncertainty that all your work could be going towards nothing throughout the sales cycle. In the SDR role, that is not the case. Never again in your sales career will you experience this level of instant gratification when it comes to your KPIs. In the SDR role, you can make an impact on how much money you make on a near hourly basis, and that should be a motivating factor for you. The number 3 rookie advantage is that you are a total clean slate when you're a new SDR. None of your peers or leadership at your company has formed any sort of opinions about you yet. You have the power to shape that from scratch with a clean slate. And the bar is very low when you're a new SDR. No one's expecting you to jump in there and be the Wolf of Wall Street right out of the gate. They're not expecting you to be able to cold call like a pro. Even the littlest wins are celebrated when you're a new SDR. Even just making your first cold call, getting hung up on for the first time, obviously booking your first meeting, things like that are celebrated, and you can build a strong brand from scratch, and this can really set the base for a strong career trajectory. Not all promotions are created equal when it comes time to promote from SDR to account executive. If you've built a strong brand, you can leverage that to get into a more desirable territory or a more desirable manager that you want to work for. You can really use the SDR role to set a strong foundation that will last you for years to come. The number 4 rookie advantage that you have that's overlooked in my opinion is the fun and the camaraderie you have as a new SDR. To this day, my favorite job I've ever had is that first SDR SDR role that I took out of college. I was working with hundreds of people that were all in the same boat as me, all out of college. We were all new to cold calling. I made tons of friends. That's not something you'll have as an account executive at most places or any other sales role that you take. Personal story I have: when I was a new SDR, I think it was day 2 on the job in training. There was some sort of break and I went to the bathroom. And in there was a guy who was probably 30 years older than me. He was in a full suit. He was probably some sort of VP or executive. And he just looks at me because I looked a little out of place. And he was like, "You one of the new SDRs?" Like, "Yep, nice to meet you." And he was like, "Let me tell you something. This will be the worst job that you ever have. It's going to be a grind. You're going to hate it, but the grass is greener on the other side." And then he just walked out. And I don't hold it against him. I think he was genuinely trying to give me good advice, but I found that I totally disagreed with that. And I don't know why there's this impression that the SDR role is the biggest grind and that the grass is way greener on the other side. Yes, there's things I love about what comes next in the sales career and you should strive to get there, but I also yearn for those days when I think times were simpler. I was in there with the trenches with my friends doing simple things like learning how to cold call. That was actually my favorite job I've ever had. An analogy I like to use if you're a sports fan is I view the SDR role like athletes who play in college. There's that team camaraderie, and they often say that when they go to the NFL or whatever professional sports league they go to, that's all they dream about while they're in college. But once they get there, all the fun is sucked out and it becomes a full-time job and it's really more work, and they yearn for the days where they were in the locker room and in the trenches with their friends and the people that they went to battle with. And I think it's a pretty transferable analogy when you go from SDR to account executive. Once you become an account executive, now you are a full-fledged sales professional. And that's great, and it's a great career, but you no longer get some of these advantages that you have when you're an SDR, and you'll yearn for those days when times were simpler. And the last point I'll make is you'll probably never experience this level of growth again, or for a long time. Another personal story I have is when I first started making cold calls, I was someone who came in with the right attitude. I did show up early. I did work late. I had the right attitude, but I was getting blown out on calls, and I truly questioned whether I would ever learn how to cold call. I actually thought I might just have to give up. And I've had a lot of growth in my career and learned a lot of things I didn't know if I'd be able to do. I learned how to run discovery calls. I learned how to manage teams and run a full sales cycle. I closed my first deal. You might think that would be the most memorable moment I had in my sales career, but it wasn't. The most memorable moment wasn't even the first time I booked a meeting on a cold call. That was memorable. It was the first time I went into a room for, call it, 3 hours, made 100 dials, and walked out of there with 4 meetings. That's when I knew I learned a money-making skill they could never take away from me for the rest of my life. I could not make cold calls for 3 years and still know how to pick up the phone and set a meeting. Yeah, you might be a little rusty like riding a bike, but you pick it up just like that. I truly didn't know if I would ever learn how to cold call. It was that moment when I walked out of that room and I knew what I did to book those 4 meetings. It wasn't luck, that I knew I had a valuable skill that would serve me for the rest of my career, and I haven't felt that level of growth or pride in a skill that I learned since. So remember this, it's the rookie advantage. You have it, you may not realize you have it, but hopefully you know how to put it to use going forward. So hope this helped. If it did, hit the like button, and I'll see you on the next one.